Hello and welcome to the first Racing News 365.com podcast of 2024. And if you're wondering, why doing the first one after the Australian Grand Prix? Well, it may be 2024, but technical gremlins do still exist. Touch wood, if you're watching this, we got through this one. All well, happy days, we're looking good. Right, my name is Nick Golding. I'm joined by Deputy Editor Jake Nicol and, as always, Lead Editor Ian Parks. Gentlemen, it has been just over 24 hours since the Australian Grand Prix. We're all awake, so we've done well. Ian, I know we spoke about it a bit yesterday. For you now, having a time to reflect, what did you make of yesterday's action? Very early action.
Yeah, as you mentioned at the top of this, mate, fingers crossed, third time lucky that we get through this, because we have really tried our hardest after Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, and it's just not sadly come off. We've just been hit with technical gremlins, as you mentioned. And that's obviously what afflicted Max Verstappen a little bit, a technical gremlin within that brake system going on there. And at least we had something other than a Max Verstappen victory to talk about, which was for us as media, for you as fans as well, for anybody watching, listening. It was something to sink your teeth into for once. It wasn't, oh God, Max has won again. Yeah, move on, whatever. Formula One has got a race to talk about. And it was a thoroughly enjoyable race at that. I enjoyed it, not just for the sole fact that Max went out, but I actually think Carlos might have given him a decent run for his money anyway, had that brake issue not occurred so early in the Grand Prix. And after that, as I say, great racing, great action, thoroughly enjoyed it. Slightly controversial ending as well with George and Fernando. Should it have been a red flag, etc.? We discussed that. But no, I loved it. What about you, Jake? What do you make of it?
I agree with what you said, Ian, about Max. Could he have given Sainz a run for his money? I think that was maybe one what if to the race. So it was kind of a situation, I think, where the race could have been even better if Max had been in it, which is not something we've said much over the past couple of years. But no, it was a good race, plenty of action. And then obviously as well, the controversial ending that we'll get into later with Russell and Alonso.
You actually mentioned a good point, Jake, because in a way, with obviously Verstappen going out, we were kind of robbed in a way of seeing, Max against Carlos, because actually, that's how it was kind of looking, because despite Max having claimed a stunning pole, he hadn't really done a race run because of the issues he had in free practice. But for you, Jake, then obviously myself and Ian discussed ours yesterday. What was your biggest takeaway from the Grand Prix?
I would say that Carlos Sainz has to be in a top seat for 2025. I think he's coming back from appendix surgery that he did, having missed out on Saudi Arabia, to then put in a performance like that and thoroughly be the dominant Ferrari driver over the weekend. He out-qualified Charles Leclerc, who made a mistake on his final Q3 lap. And then Sainz obviously overtook Max at the start of the race and pulled away. And as we said, it's just a shame that Max wasn't there to give us a proper fight between the two. But I think, and as Christian Horner said after the race, he was asked about second Red Bull seat for next season. And I think he mentioned Carlos Sainz without specifically mention him, but he did hint towards that Sainz might be in his thinking for that seat.
So he should be, in fairness. I was going to say that. Yeah, I was just going to, and so he should be, in fairness. But the problem that might be a fly in the ointment for Red Bull is the previous toxicity, and that's a word used by Helmut Marko, I might add, regarding the past relationship between Max and Carlos. No love lost, quite clearly, in using such a strong word as that in this instance. How are Red Bull going to view this? Do they simply look at, say, do we want the strongest driver in that seat? And right now, after 3 Grand Prix, you've got to suggest that that's Carlos, given those drivers that are available. Or have they got to be a little bit more political and look at it and think, well, do we just simply go with continuing with someone like Checo? He's a willing, able, capable number 2. He's proven that over the past few years. He can be in the right place at the right time to pick up a Grand Prix win. Should have done that in Australia, didn't. And that was obviously a big issue from Red Bull looking at that. And Mr. Marco, once again, had his thoughts on that. He does love a good comment, does Helmut, doesn't he? Does love stirring things up a little bit. It's a real dilemma, I think, Red Bull have got on their hands, because they've got, I think Daniel Ricciardo, ordinarily, in Christian Horner's mind, has been his go-to guy, bearing in mind what Daniel achieved over the second half of last season, before his injury in the Dutch Grand Prix and post-injury when he returned, thinking, Daniel pulls it out the bag here, then, yeah, he's got the seat again. Daniel's in serious trouble. And if you believe headlines in the New Zealand Herald today, they are indicating that Ricciardo has 2 Grand Prix to save his return to F1. Otherwise, it's Liam Lawson in that seat. If that was the case, and Liam Lawson then proved himself at RB over the remainder of this season, does that then thrust him into the picture for the Red Bull seat for next year? We know we got 21 Grand Prix. It's still a bloody long way to go for the rest of this season. 21
Grand Prix.
Just only 20 more to go, folks. Don't worry. So lots of permutations that could play out over the course of this season for Christian Horner to mull over. That's for sure.
So, all right, let's forget politics for a second, because there's plenty of that in Formula One at the moment. Where do you put Carlos Sainz? Because there are so many incredible seats available. Where would you like to see him? In, for me, I know we just said it's, they've got options. I'd love to see him a Red Bull, because I think when you look at the available drivers, he's probably the one who can take it to Max the most, or at least probably compete with Max more than, for example, Checo. For you, despite the rumours, would you like to see him a Red Bull? Would you like to see him look at, for example, Aston Martin or Mercedes?
It's only one of those three, obviously. As we discussed, as you mentioned, it has to be a top seat. Anything less for him than one of those 3 teams, and I can't see him. He might decide to take a sabbatical if that was the case. Why would he go to a lesser team than one of those big 3 that we just mentioned? There's absolutely no need for him to do that. I mean, this is a perfect opportunity. There are plenty of seats available. We know that. Number of drivers out of contract at the end of this season. The way he's driving at the moment, the fact he came back 2 weeks after his appendectomy, the fact that he then chuck it to Max and Red Bull over the course of the Australian Grand Prix weekend, I think has really thrust himself into the minds of Lawrence Stroll at Aston Martin, Toto Wolff at Mercedes, without a shadow of a doubt. They might not have ideally had him on their radar going into Australia, but now, after what he's achieved, bet your bottom dollar that all of a sudden, hold on a second, Carlos, he might not be a bad shout here. Where would I ideally like to see him? Yeah, I'd love to see him go up against Max again at Red Bull. Let's see if that toxicity still exists, and if it does, how's that going to play out? You would have thought it'd be water under the bridge now. They're older, wiser. They've moved on since Carlos left the team when he was teammate alongside Max previously. So
many years ago now.
Many years ago. So
it just makes me feel really old, to be honest, Loza.
Bless you. Older, wiser, more experienced. And you got to think, as I say, water under the bridge, bygones. But for me right now, he's looking the strongest contender. But as we say, it's only 3 Grand Prix. It could change again in 3 Grand Prix. Who knows? But it's going to be a fascinating topic that we're going to keep discussing and referring back to as the season goes on. Looking forward to this one.
3 Grand Prix could change, next weekend in Japan. Jake, for you, where would you like to see Sainz? And also, was, given the circumstances, 16 days after a pretty serious operation, was yesterday the best performance of Carlos Sainz's career?
I would say it was, definitely. Of his 3 Grand Prix wins so far, I think this was the most convincing in how he managed to pull out the gap over Leclerc and Norris after Max retired. Obviously, you've got Singapore last year where he tactically used a DRS to hold Norris and Russell and Lewis Hamilton up. But I would say as a complete package, this was his most complete Grand Prix weekend performance. And then as for where I'd like to see him next year, it has to be Red Bull. As Ian was saying, I think they're both Max and Carlos are definitely now more older, wiser. They're not the young kids wanting to get to that Red Bull seat as they were back in 2015 when they were both rookies. So yeah, he's definitely put himself on the radar as someone who can be consistent, and that's probably the next big challenge for him. Can he show this level of performance over a few races, 5-10 races, and consistently get podiums and wins and pole positions, which is not something he's always been able to do. Sometimes he's been a bit, 2 or 3 races here and there he's on top, like he was at Zandvoort in Italy and Singapore last year. Those 3 races were outstanding. But can he now go on and do this for 5, 10, 15 races? And who knows, maybe even put a championship challenge together.
Now, I've got a really bold prediction. Okay, I'm going to say Sainz is going to go to Red Bull on a 1-year deal next year. He's going to get the boot. Lawson will do a season at RB. And then in 2026, Sainz will go to Audi. And then Lawson will go to Red Bull. That's my prediction. Let us know in the comments where you think Sainz is going to end up. And actually, in general, who do you think is going to get the seat alongside Max Verstappen? Sticking with Red Bull, the RB20 has been referred to as a UFO because of how technically advanced it is. However, in the opening 3 rounds, we have seen Max Verstappen significantly quicker than Sergio Perez. Okay, yes, Perez in the race did have some damage yesterday. Is the RB20 as good as it's been made out to be? Or is it a case of actually Max Verstappen is just in a league of his own?
So what you're talking there is man or machine.
Effectively, yes.
Effectively,
that's a similar way of putting it. Yeah.
And I think the obvious answer is it's a case of both. We've seen that with the RB18, we've seen that with the RB19, and we're seeing that again so far with the RB20. Max is just a cut above. You don't have 3 world titles against your name for nothing. And yes, he's been in the best machinery, or certainly one of the best machinery over these past few seasons. And you've got to tip your hat to Adrian Newey and his design team and all the technical people at Red Bull for the job that they have done. Absolutely commendable. They've absolutely hit the ground running with these regulations, these aerodynamic regulations, ground effect regulations that came into force at the start of 2022. And Adrian just had a handle on it from the very beginning. And no one so far has been able to match what he has achieved in terms of his design. And the rest of the team around him, of course. Can't just single Adrian, but of course he is the main man there, so Chief Technical Officer at Red Bull. And then, of course, you might develop the car, but look at what Max has achieved against Checo. Checo's no slouch, we know that. He's a very capable driver. But them going head-to-head, look how far ahead Max has always been in qualifying, in the race. And that's where an outstanding driver shows his capability and his talent going up against a very good driver. We're seeing the difference quite clear.
Jake, obviously, Ferrari are the team currently challenging Red Bull the most. One team Red Bull are certainly not afraid of at the moment is Mercedes. With 3 rounds in after yesterday, Toto Wolff came out discussing the negative thoughts, how it was a brutal race with the double retirement. What is happening at Mercedes? Because this is not the team that won 8 Constructors' Championships in a row. What is going on?
They're just lost with the technical regulations. I don't think that they still quite fully understand how to master these regulations. They're still, Lewis Hamilton was going on about in Saudi Arabia, the rear end of the car is still loose. They've got a weakness in high-speed corners. So I think they're just a bit lost and scrambling to try and find a solution. And so, they need to go back to the factory and, is it the tools that they're using? Because, as Ian said earlier, I think James Allison, he knows what he's doing. Mercedes they know how to make a fast racing car. This is still a fast racing car. It's just not as good as it can be. So I think they need to go back and really understand, is it something wrong at the factory? Is it the tools? Is it the equipment that they've got? Can they make a change there that might unlock, that silver bullet that Toto Wolff has gone on about a few times? So I think they're just a bit lost. And the longer it goes on, it's like the idea: can they ever solve this? Can they ever get to a point where they're challenging again for wins and championships? I think that's a big question that they've got to answer.
Ian, do you think they're going to get there before 2026?
Looking at what we've seen so far, you've got to say no, but they've come in with a new package this season. They knew they'd taken the wrong turn from the very beginning of those 22 regulations with its zero side pod concept. They persisted with it into 23, even though they got that win in Sao Paulo, courtesy of George, at the end of 22. So they thought, we've done it. We've not cracked it, but we're on the right road. So they persisted with it into 23. And at the start of 23, they knew straight away, as soon as that car hit the track in testing, that they'd made a mistake. With the resources that they had left in terms of the budget cap, they tried to make corrections throughout the course of last season. They didn't do too badly. Came out of it, though, for the first time since 2011 without a win, which will have hurt them greatly, even though they celebrated finishing runner-up in the championship, which wasn't too bad of an achievement, but Red Bull had outdone them by more than double the points that Mercedes scored, which tells you all you need to know. So realizing where they were going wrong over those first 2 years, they thought, we know what we've got to do now. And they made quite a concerted effort over the back end of last season and over the winter to develop this W15, changing the chassis, changing the gearbox concept, listening to the drivers, in particular Lewis Hamilton, with regards to his input and what he wanted from the car, the cockpit notably moving slightly further back to give a more greater center to the car, to ensure that the rear would be more stable, which was something that he had long complained about, that the instability at the rear of the W14 especially was just not what he wanted. He couldn't push into and out of a corner light to ensure that he was able to get the lap time that he was looking for. And so going into this season, as I say, they thought they got a handle on it. And quite clearly they haven't. These results have been hugely surprising, really surprising. I was not expecting Red Bull. Up until that penalty for Fernando Alonso, they were the fifth team on the Constructors' Championship. Fernando dropping back 2 places elevated Mercedes back up to 4th. But they're already a long way adrift, which is far from what they were anticipating. Can they turn it around this season? There's plenty of time. I do believe they've got scope within not only the technical team, but also the budget cap to try and make amends so far. It's going to be fascinating to see, but if they don't get it right, then they're set in stone for 25. And then, of course, it's all about what they can do with the new power unit regulations going into 2026. Fascinating topic at Mercedes going on at the moment. Really interesting to see. And Toto's comments post-race yesterday, very, very strong from him, going on about trying to dispel these negative thoughts, but still having belief within himself that he's the right person to lead the team, because at the end of the day, it's about the technical aspect, not his leadership.
Yeah. Do you think then that, because Wolff was obviously very despondent yesterday after Lewis Hamilton retired after a power unit failure, that's a rarity for Mercedes.
Sorry, funny. Might as well comment on it, because we're all sitting here going, what the hell was that? And and our viewers are going to be thinking, did we just hear that? Yes, folks, you just heard some dogs barking. So
yeah, we're not going to edit this, because that was just a moment for all of us. Yeah. What we're talking about, Mercedes.
Postman, right. I think.
That's poor time by the postman. So Royal Mail, you'll be getting a letter. We were talking about Mercedes and Wolff's comments. He was, as you mentioned, Dean, he was in no mood after the race. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton had a power unit failure, which is a rarity for a Mercedes powertrain as it is. And obviously you mentioned as well, obviously George had a horrible crash. Thankfully he is okay. Following an incident with Alonso. Alonso did effectively get the blame without being given the blame in some weird wording by the FIA. He was given a 20-second time penalty for allegedly brake checking George not once but twice. Now we
potentially
both
dangerous driving. Let's get it right, Nick. Potentially dangerous driving. Yeah.
Okay, we'll say the accurate words here.
Yeah.
We all know what it looked like. It obviously was a 20-second time penalty because that's what it. Otherwise, it would have been a drive-through. Do you think, Jake? Because myself and Ian, we thought the penalty was fair. Do you believe the penalty for Fernando was, it was correct?
Yes, I think. Well, first of all, it was typical Fernando Alonso, wasn't it? Trying to dabble in the dark arts to try and get that advantage. So what he was trying to do was he was trying to hold Russell up along the long sweeping straights, and he just got it a little bit wrong. I think this time. So I think he hit the brakes 100 meters before the corner, then got back on the throttle, and then hit the brake again for the corner, and it was just on the wrong side, I think, of the of that fine line between what's acceptable and what's not. And then obviously poor George Russell sort of had nowhere to go and had to take the avoiding action that we saw. So yeah, I think it was just about deserved. And it also says now with the 20-second penalty that he got and 3 penalty points on his license as well. I think those type of moves not what we want to see. So yeah, I think it was a fair penalty in the end.
Dabble in the dark arts. Professor Snape would be proud. I like that one. Ian, are you still, 20-second time penalty, 3 penalty points, absolutely fair?
Yeah, I think so. As we discussed, the steward's statement said it all, really. I mean, you've got to go with what those guys have come up with. And
come up with.
I'm being distracted. We've had dogs earlier, and I've now got my cat sat on my desk next to me.
We have a 4th podcast guest.
We have. Who's rubbing her head against my laptop, and that's why the picture keeps on shaking.
The newest member of RacingNews365.com.
My cat. I know, brilliant. Thanks, Lily.
Coming to a paddock near you.
Yeah, no, just getting back to the question. No, it was fair, definitely. You read what he did in terms of his efforts to slow and brake in different place and braking earlier, etc. And quite clearly, he was absolutely trying to. I got to use Jake's phrase. It was brilliant. Dabble in the dark arts. It was Fernando at his finest, using all his experience, his knowledge, his know-how, to try to gain whatever advantage he could over George to keep him at bay. Unfortunately, it cost George and Mercedes heavily when you think of the cost of the damage that will have been sustained. So you can imagine that Mercedes won't be too happy with the dark arts on this occasion. 20-second time penalty, I guess, without definitively proving that Fernando absolutely brake checked George, then you have to say, yeah, it was right on this occasion. Yourself, Nick? What about your thoughts?
I think, having been, I'm not going to say brake checked, having been brake checked myself before in a karting race, much slower speed, it's terrifying. And obviously, George's radio message as well, we spoke about that yesterday as well, was actually not particularly nice to listen to. He was genuinely terrified, and it's understandable why. But actually, one thing I want to talk about, and I think it's a really interesting talking point, so people, please, for those who are watching, make sure you comment on this as well. We're seeing now, obviously, several circuits being redesigned almost. Albert Park has become significantly quicker, particularly at turn 6. Obviously, the Jeddah Corniche circuit, where we were for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, is a newer circuit, a street circuit nevertheless, but a very, very fast one. That's what it was designed to be, a very fast street circuit. Azerbaijan is another very fast street circuit. Catalonia has seen, obviously, changes to make it faster, even though it's actually reverted to the traditional layout. Do you think now track designers are beginning to prioritise, without potentially realising, speed over safety?
I think there's always a degree of safety built in. I don't think that they're absolutely ignoring the safety element and just going absolutely, what's the fastest track we can build and go and build that one. But I think there could be something in that. I think there has been, the tracks that you mentioned, Nick, over the past few years that have joined the calendar or have had some changes. There's a lot of emphasis on building speed up. And, as we know, racing cars are going to hit each other or something at some point. That's just the nature of what happens. So I don't want to say that they're absolutely, disregarding the safety and it's what's the fastest track we can build. But I think we are heading sort of in that direction of, faster tracks, and obviously faster tracks brings, increased danger as well. So like at turn 6 and 7 where the incident happened for George, let's not forget that pre 2022 that was a slow corner where drivers had to brake, maybe change down a gear to get through, and now they've obviously sped it up with the other changes to Melbourne. So I think it's somewhere in the middle, if that makes any sense.
Ian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think somewhere like Albert Park as well. I think they recognised over time, and you got to think of when that circuit was originally built, that it had no longer become suitable for modern day F1. And that's why they decided to go ahead and make the changes that they did. And I think they made them absolutely for the better. I think Albert Park now is a fabulous racing circuit. I really do. Love the changes that they've done there. Whereas previously it had started to create very sterile racing, given the advances in modern technology of today's F1 cars. And I think same with Catalonia as well. Again, that's never been a great race circuit from the get-go.
Good test track.
It's just
when it's not snowing
for me. And obviously they've tried to tweak that sector 3, tried to make it more interesting, and I think it's going to be one of those that no matter what you do with Catalonia, it's never going to lend itself to be a great Formula One circuit. They've got to do something completely different with that one. But I think safety is always paramount. That's the absolutely overriding number one priority for the construction of a racetrack is safety. And what they're trying to do quite clearly is bring the element of speed into it. And obviously, as you've seen with Jeddah, they appreciated from the first race that actually we've gone a bit too far with some of these corners here, blind corners in certain respects. They've tried to change those. Even after race 4 now that we've had, they're still thinking, well, actually, there are still a couple of corners that we could change just to make them that little bit a degree safer. So, as I say, as Jake's mentioned, safety will always be number one when they're constructing a circuit. And then it's a case of what can we do then to make it really fascinating, interesting, speed-wise, bearing in mind not so much the limitations of today's cars, but the extent and the power of today's Formula One cars, which are just far beyond anything that we've seen in the past.
I think it's a really interesting.
Just on that quickly,
Jake,
if I can, I think what they could potentially do at turn 6 and 7 in Albert Park is maybe move the barrier backwards for next year's race as well. So obviously last year we saw Alex Albon hit that barrier in a similar fashion to George Russell, and he bounced back into the middle of the track. Obviously that's what happened to Russell as well. So I think that's just something they could maybe consider when they're constructing the circuit ahead of next year's race. Can we move this wall back a little bit? Because I don't think it's really changed that much from the old layout there when it was a lot slower, and obviously now the cars are approaching quite a bit faster. So I think maybe a bit of a few changes there might be something that they could look at.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really talking point. I was saying for those watching, please comment below. Do you think Should changes be made to turn 6? Are circuits becoming too fast now? Let us know. I'd be really interested to see what you think. Just finally, guys, we have got a piece on this on our website, racingnews365.com, but let's each give our winner and loser of the Australian Grand Prix. Ian, we'll start with you. Let's go for losers first so we can end on a positive. Who was, for you, a loser yesterday? I hate using that word, but we'll go for it.
Daniel Ricciardo over the weekend.
Straight in.
Yeah, straight in, absolutely. And I know we talked about Daniel earlier in this show, but he is now a driver under pressure. And he somehow has to find something over the course of the Japanese Grand Prix weekend to prove that he is worthy of that RB seat. Never mind the Red Bull seat at the minute. Forget that, Daniel. Show that you're worthy of staying at RB first and foremost. If the article in the New Zealand Herald is, proven to be accurate, as they understand it, Liam Lawson's going to be in if Daniel doesn't prove himself in Japan and Miami. Just thinking what that following race was. So those are the two races they're saying Daniel's got. It's just, I don't know, something really strange has happened to Daniel. And there's got to be concern inside his head at the moment as to what's going on. So yeah, for me, Daniel came out of that with a lot on his plate, a lot on his mind, and a lot to prove.
Jake, who's your loser?
It has to be Mercedes for me. They come into the weekend having worked on their high speed problems that they had in the previous races, and Lewis Hamilton didn't even make Q3, of course, and then he has a rare engine failure during the race, and then George Russell crashes later on, and they come out with no points, and it's only as we said about Alonso's penalty that they're fourth in the constructor. So I think there's a lot of hard work and burning the midnight oil at Brackley, trying to figure out what do we do, how can we make this car challenge with Ferrari, because Ferrari have made a step away from Mercedes now, and they're nipping at Red Bull's heels, and Mercedes are still kind of, I guess, where they were last season, if not maybe gone a little bit backwards.
Nick,
for myself, loser, I'm going to go Stake F1, because they had not one but two more botched pit stops. I've gotten through McDonald's drive-through quicker than Stake F1 have done a pit stop this season. I mean, I know they've got problems with, obviously, their pit stop equipment, but it's just, I think that's with 3 rounds in, they've had 4 pit stops of over 40 seconds. I think I read somewhere, this may be slightly inaccurate, but I think their pit stops combined this season are already more than all of Carlos Sainz's pit stops from last season, which is ridiculous. And hopefully, they get it sorted, because otherwise they've got no chance of scoring points. Flipping to the positive, I'll start with my winner, and it's a hard one, but Yuki Tsunoda, he has come into this season kind of seen as RB's number 2, because everyone said Ricciardo's going to, he's going to overshadow him. He's going to be in the shout for the Red Bull seat. Actually, it's been the complete opposite. Tsunoda has delivered. He's been unlucky not to score points actually in Bahrain and Saudi. Finally got obviously 6 points in Australia. And actually, he's looking like a more mature, a more relaxed driver. There's less of this, angry Yuki over the radio. He has mellowed, but by mellowing, he's actually become a very, very strong racing driver. And I don't think he's going to get the Red Bull seat. I just can't see it happening. But I would like to see him in a more competitive team just to see what he's capable of. Jake, for you, who's your winner?
Has to be the main man, Carlos Sainz, I think. As we said, to put in a performance like that after, pretty big surgery. I don't know about you two if you've had your appendix out, but I haven't. Hopefully it stays in, but that is some drastic surgery that he's undergone. And he was saying, before the weekend that, for 10 days he was in bed. He didn't know whether he was going to be able to make it to Australia. And then when he jumped in for FP1, there was still some discomfort, and he was a bit, he wasn't pain-free. And then to stick it on the front row and dominate the race, basically. Has to be Carlos Sainz for me.
Ian, bring us home.
As you guys have gone for those two that you've mentioned. Obviously, I've got to go for something a little bit different. I would have mentioned Carlos quite obviously, simply for the fact that not so much he won, but he's now, if anybody ever had a doubt over him, he's now... my cat's just done that again. Lovely. Thanks, Lily.
The fourth guest is back.
No, exactly. He's now thoroughly thrust himself into the shop window for a drive for next year, as I say, if anybody ever had a doubt. But for me, if I'm going to pick something different, I'm going to go for Haas. As I say, yeah, give a nod to Haas. Why not? They've done a stellar job so far this season. They've managed to overcome their issues of last year quite clearly when those tyres that they put on the car just couldn't last because of the nature of the car itself. Just ate through the tyres. They dropped through the field at an enormous rate of knots on many occasions, as we saw last year. And really were on the back foot coming into this season to such an extent that even new team principal Ayo Komatsu was unsure as to what was going to happen, had targeted 8th place in the Constructors' Championship as something that was would be a major achievement for them. Well, guess what? They're actually in with a decent shot of that after these first 3 races. It's always a case of being there at the checkered flag. And Nico Hulkenberg and Kevin Magnussen were there at the checkered flag yesterday, as Nico was in the previous race. And they took advantage of the retirements. Obviously, George Russell's managed to get Kevin in the points. And yeah, a decent shout out for Haas. And they're not looking too bad. And if they can continue to develop, as we know that they are going to do this season, they've got a regular supply of upgrades coming through over the course of this campaign, not just the odd one here or there as they did last season, then that 8th place that Ayo is after is actually looking on the cards for them.
Good stuff. Well, for those watching, let us know in the comments who are your winners and losers. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. From Ian, Jake and I, we made it for a podcast. We'll catch you guys later. Bye.
Take care.